Good day. Today's lecture is devoted to methods of learning, with particular emphasis on practical training methods. In university education, this topic is especially significant because learning cannot remain at the level of abstract knowledge alone. On the contrary, higher education must ensure that knowledge is transformed into action, skill, and professional competence. Therefore, practical methods should be viewed as an essential means of connecting theory with application in active student participation and in direct engagement with tasks. In this respect, their purpose is not merely to reinforce information, but to form abilities that may later be applied in real contexts. An exercise accordingly may be defined as the repeated performance of a mental or practical action aimed at mastering or improving its quality. Moreover, such exercises are used across all subjects and at different stages of learning, although their form necessarily depends on the nature of the discipline and the aims of instruction. At this point, it is necessary to distinguish several major forms of exercises. Oral exercises develop speech culture, reading technique, oral counting, and coherent narration. Written exercises include dictation, grammar, spelling, essays, problem solving, and written descriptions. Graphic exercises involve drawings, schemes, graphs, maps, and posters, thereby strengthening visual and spatial thinking. Educational labor exercises, by contrast, apply theoretical knowledge to practical work contexts. Taken together, these forms demonstrate that practical training embraces verbal, written, graphic, and applied dimensions of learning. A further distinction concerns the level of student independence. Reproducing exercises require learners to follow a model and repeat demonstrated actions. Training exercises, however, involve a higher degree of autonomy, although pedagogical guidance is still present. This progression is of methodological importance because learning should gradually move from imitation toward increasingly independent performance. In other words, practical training is effective when it leads the student beyond repetition to controlled self, to directed action. Creative work occupies a particularly important place within practical methods. It contributes to the development of student abilities, forms the skills of purposeful independent work, and deepens knowledge through application to specific tasks. Essays, reviews, course projects, diploma projects, drawings, and other creative tasks are especially valuable because they require initiative, interpretation, and original construction. Hence, creative work should be regarded not as an optional supplement, but as one of the principal means through which intellectual maturity becomes visible. Laboratory work represents another fundamental form of practical instruction. Here, students conduct experiments, use technical devices, and acquire knowledge through direct investigation. At the same time, teacher supervision remains indispensable throughout all stages of the process. This combination of student activity and pedagogical control gives laboratory work its distinctive educational value. Indeed, knowledge gained through experiment is not simply received, it is verified in action. Practical training requires inner organization. For this reason, the slide identifies several core techniques: planning the sequence of task completion, formulating the problem clearly, providing timely prompting and encouragement, regulating and verifying progress, carrying out preliminary checking, and detecting as well as correcting errors. Each of these techniques performs a necessary function. Collectively, they ensure that practical work remains structured, purposeful, and pedagogically effective. Accordingly, skill formation depends not only on activity itself, but also on how that activity is organized. 4 principal practical methods are summarized here: exercises, laboratory work, practical work proper, and educational games. Exercises form specific skills through repeated action. Laboratory work develops knowledge through experiment. Practical work is directed toward educational and professional competence. Educational games create structured situations in which students learn through purposeful participation. Therefore, the teacher's responsibility lies in selecting the method that corresponds most precisely to the intended educational result. The lecture now returns in greater detail to oral and written exercises. Oral work is especially important in the study of native and foreign languages, where it supports reading culture, oral calculation, coherent narration, and systematic presentation of thought. Written work, by contrast, provides the basis for such skills as grammar, spelling, stylistics, essay writing, note-taking, problem-solving, and written descriptions of experiments. Thus, although these two forms are closely related, they train different dimensions of intellectual and communicative performance. Graphic exercises contribute to understanding, memorization, and the development of analytical and spatial imagination through visual representation. Labor training has a different orientation. It demonstrates the correct application of theoretical knowledge in practical work. The slide rightly notes that such training is especially effective when the teacher observes, comments, and organizes periodic repetition. Consequently, practical mastery emerges most successfully where theory is applied under guided, repeated conditions. Practical and game-based methods are effective because they unite activity with educational purpose. They develop conscientious habits of work, strengthen cognitive ability, and form a more positive attitude toward learning. At the same time, their value does not lie in activity for its own sake. Rather, these methods are pedagogically meaningful because they organize participation in a way that supports concentration, responsibility, and intellectual engagement. In this sense, active involvement becomes a means of deeper learning. The effectiveness of practical work depends not only on method but also on timing and location. As indicated on the slide, such work is best conducted after the completion of a major thematic section, since at that stage it can perform a generalizing function. Furthermore, practical work may take place not only in the classroom but also beyond it, for example on school grounds. This is pedagogically important because practical learning should correspond to the internal logic of content rather than to routine convenience alone. The benefits of practical methods are especially clear in the formation of diligence, accuracy, economy, and conscientious performance. Through these methods, students learn to organize the process of work carefully, define the aim of activity, select means of solution, prepare tools and materials, and evaluate the completed result. Therefore, practical methods influence not only subject knowledge, but also the broader culture of work. They cultivate responsibility, order, and disciplined execution. Educational games create situations that simulate elements of surrounding reality and require students to search for an appropriate solution. Their pedagogical usefulness lies in the development of attention, independent thinking, and curiosity. Moreover, a well-organized game intensifies concentration because it transforms intellectual effort into meaningful participation. For this reason, the game method should be regarded not as a distraction from learning, but as one of its productive forms, especially where motivation and initiative must be strengthened. Finally, the broader effects and contemporary forms of game-based learning deserve attention. When organized properly, games involve students so deeply that learning ceases to appear burdensome, while knowledge acquisition and imagination develop simultaneously. In addition, the game method positively influences the emotional sphere by creating a favorable attitude toward work and making repetition more varied. The slide also refers to simulation games, thought generation activities, and staged forms such as dialogue and performance. Consequently, games now occupy a recognized place in modern pedagogy and should be evaluated by their educational effectiveness rather than by outdated assumptions about their status. Thank you for your attention. I hope this lecture has clarified the educational significance of practical training methods and their role in the formation of skills, independence, and professional readiness.